water. Without it, there can be no life at all. Drought, the absence of water, is one of nature's most devastating calamities for man and all other forms of life. Hi, I'm George Page for Nature, and this is the Colorado River, literally the lifeline of our arid American Southwest. Out here, the Colorado is so important that it's the focus of an ongoing war between the states, such as Arizona, where I'm standing, and California over there on the other side. Almost halfway around the world from here, there's another river called the Tiva. It's in the Tsavo Plains of Kenya, East Africa. And like the Colorado, it's a lifeline to people and to some of the most magnificent animals on Earth. This week, our extraordinary film by Simon Trevor is about a time when the Tiva dried up with devastating results. But what happened when the drought ended was a great natural drama, and Simon Trevor was there to film it. The worst drought in living memory had devastated the Tsavo Plains in Kenya. Thirst could still be quenched along the Tiva River because water lay trapped in rock crevices beneath the sand. Older elephants had learned from previous droughts just where and how to find it. They dug holes with their feet and trunks, not an easy task in the dry sand. The survival of many animals depended upon these holes, predator and prey. It was a time of agony from which there was no escape. The water level sank deeper and deeper. The calves were desperate to drink and always knocked sand into the wells, forcing the adults to dig them out again before they could drink themselves. Despite their own thirst, the adults always allowed the calves to drink first. As the drought dragged on, the older and weaker animals died, not from thirst, but of exhaustion, brought on by their search for food and the long journey back to the river for water. Then, at last, rain fell, but it was 60 miles away. The elephants disappeared overnight. Without them, the other animals had no means of finding water. That same day, the Tiva flooded. The distant rain had fallen at the head of the river. Now, the watercourse was full. There was plenty to drink in the river, but no rain and no food along its banks. Already, the trees and shrubs had been stripped, the grass reduced to dry stubble. There was little left to save the animals from starvation. Nearby, the Galana River flows from the foothills of Kilimanjaro. When the rains have been heavy upstream, it becomes a raging torrent by the time it reaches Tsavo. The flood overwhelms everything. Even the crocodiles must leave the water or be swept away. Rains upstream do nothing for the Tsavo Plains. The flood rushes through a bleached, barren landscape. The situation is still desperate. Trees and bushes eaten down to bare stumps. Hardly enough cover for a lizard. Nightfall brings relief from the heat. for those still living. Scavengers like the crocodile are the only beneficiaries from the drought. A crocodile cannot chew. Instead, it bites and spins until a piece breaks off. But if it does not break off, the crocodile must unwind or drown. The crocodiles gorge themselves as long as meat and bone remain. At the height of the drought, while others are starving, they have plenty of food. But when rain falls on the plains, most animals will leave the river, and there'll be few feasts for the crocodiles. This depression was once a water hole and the center of life on the plains. Until rain fills it once again, the distant river remains the only source of water. The search for food takes the animals further afield each day, but they must always return to the river. If the plover leaves her nest, the sun will cook her eggs within minutes. She must sit through the heat of the day, whatever happens to come by. The plover has laid her eggs at the height of the drought. Is she taking a chance? Or do the actions of birds and other animals suggest they know when the rains are on the way? The Agama lizard has been living in an old woodpecker's hole, but now a pair of wood hoopoes need it for their nest. That evening, there's a promising cloud in the sky. After 3 weeks, there's not much of the elephant left, and even the bones will be smashed and eaten by the larger crocodiles. A shoulder blade weighing at least 150 pounds is dragged away to be consumed later. Finally, only the skull and tusks remain. Next morning, gathering storm clouds signal the end of the drought. The skull of the elephant sinks as it's buried in the sands of the riverbed. The last trace of an animal that has survived perhaps 4 major droughts during its 60 years, only to die at the end of the 5th, just as life was about to return to the plains. Now there's a real change in the air. The plains are ominously quiet until the dust storm arrives, driven by a gale force wind. Elephants are always the first to move toward the rain, even if it's 60 miles away. They can smell it, and they know that the water holes will fill up soon. The gathering rain clouds begin to obliterate the dust storm. Tree frogs appear suddenly from where no one knows. The rain is heavy and widespread, giving promise of an exceptionally good year. The rains came too late for this elephant, whose bones lie beside the trail it once used. Every elephant trail leads to a water hole. Now the trails have become streams, rushing to fill them. The storm has passed. In less than an hour, floods replace drought. The water holes are full again, and soon will be the center of life on the plains. Within days, the vegetation will sprout fresh growth. At last, animals are spared the long trek to the river. The older elephants can rest now. This matriarch has brought her group safely through the drought. Because of her decisions, the younger elephants have learned valuable lessons they will remember in the future. The evening after the first rain is like no other. Hardly a sound breaks the silence. There's an expectant air, as though something is about to happen. The giant land snail had buried itself at the end of the last rains, while the ground was still moist, using the leading edge of its shell. Then it sealed the shell entrance and remained underground. Most frogs have also spent the drought underground. Within hours of the rain, just as soon as the ground is soft enough, they escape to the surface and immediately make their way to the nearest water hole, where they congregate in the thousands. The first night of the rains belongs to the frogs. The males make all the noise. They call by pumping air through a valve between the lungs and the air sac. Their aim is to attract a female and mate as soon as possible. Their offspring must have enough time to mature before the water holes dry up again. Reproduction is the frog's first priority after the drought. Only when they have mated will they seek food. As more and more frogs arrive, competition grows. Each male tries to impress the females by outcalling his rivals. The Tsavo frogs come in all sizes, some no bigger than a thumbnail. Enough of each species has survived to breed again. Though different species mix freely, the Chiromantis tree frogs fight among themselves for the highest positions from which to send out their calls. The male giant bullfrogs, some almost 6 inches across, will not tolerate the intrusion of another male. The battle seems expressionless and bizarre, but it's in deadly earnest and could end with one devouring the other. The females are silent. When they arrive at the water hole, the males redouble their efforts. A frantic struggle develops when several females seek the attention of a single male. The male, being both smaller and outnumbered, finds the odds overwhelming. The male manages to break free. In the confusion, he finds himself next to a different frog. Soon he's calling again, and the females are ready and waiting. When a drought is broken by exceptionally heavy rain, the frogs' vocal battles go on into the morning until all the receptive females have mated and spawned. Thousands upon thousands of eggs are laid during this first night and early hours of the next morning. It takes 5 hours for the mud at the bottom of the water hole to become soft enough for the lungfish to escape from the hole where it stayed alive during the drought. Soon after the lungfish emerges, the first of the bullfrog tadpoles hatch, less than 1 day after spawning. To all intents and purposes, a tadpole is a fish when it hatches, absorbing oxygen through its gills, unable to live out of water. Later, it will develop lungs and legs. The tadpoles feed voraciously upon algae and vegetation. The spirals are their intestines. Tadpoles that die are quickly devoured by the others. This year, the rains are making up for past failures. Time and again, the storm clouds build up and drench the plains. Seeds that have lain dormant for years sprout at last. The plants reach out across the bare soil and rapidly transform Tsavo into a mass of flowers. The vegetation, too, must reproduce while the rains last. In water holes across the plains, the tadpole population is adjusting to the realities of life. They become the principal prey for a large variety of predators. Pound for pound, the lungfish probably accounts for the largest number of tadpoles. This primitive fish is a living relic from the earliest stages of life on Earth. "400 million years ago, this fish developed lungs and rudimentary legs, then evolved no further. It's been eating tadpoles ever since." The tadpoles are preyed upon from above as well as from below the surface. The black heron has a particularly ingenious method of catching its prey. With its wings, the heron creates a patch of shade, which unsuspecting tadpoles might welcome as shelter from the surrounding commotion. Little do they realize that the beak of a sharp-eyed heron is poised directly above them. This year, hundreds of thousands of tadpoles have survived, despite all the predation. The giant bullfrog tadpoles are about 3 inches long. They've already developed lungs and are breathing at the surface. They will soon leave the water. The exceptionally good rains have produced more than enough food for all the animals. As the vegetation flourishes, the animals fatten. It's a brief time of rest and plenty between the drought just past and the dry season ahead. One of the strangest plants in Tsavo is Hydnora. It's an underground parasite which lives off the roots of acacia trees. It has no leaves and no roots of its own. Only the flower is ever seen above ground, and it attracts beetles by emitting a strong smell of decaying meat. The beetles are trapped inside for 2 days. In their attempts to escape, they pollinate the flower, ensuring the survival of Hydnora. Very soon, the flower begins to collapse, and the beetles finally escape when it dies a few hours later. Like everything else about Tsavo's good times, the flower has a short life. It's not often the rains go on for more than a few weeks, but when they do, the whole of Tsavo benefits. Rolling about in the mud not only paints the elephants red, it also marks the beginnings of a water hole. The elephants scrape out shallow depressions. Their weight and broad feet compress the ground so that the depression holds water. Every elephant that finds the hole takes the process a little further, until in years it will be large enough to benefit many animals. The saddle-billed stork hunts along the edge of the water hole, searching for young frogs leaving the water. The new bullfrogs can live off their tails for the first day or two as they absorb them, but their only urge now is to hunt and eat and build up the reserves they must have before retreating underground. After today, they'll feed by night and shelter from the sun by day. They'll travel far, only returning to the water hole when they're old enough to breed. The world's largest land animal also needs vast amounts of food. During such good times, one might expect the elephants simply to fill their stomachs and spend the rest of the day at leisure. But in fact, elephants spend as much as 19 hours a day feeding, regardless of season. They have a taste and a need for particular plants, and they will go to amazing lengths in search of them. At this time of the year, they eat mostly leaves. Later, only the stems and not the leaves. And finally, only the roots without the leaves or stems. Every matriarch learned during her long childhood just where and when the essential plants are available. Now she leads her herd to those special places in search of that particular morsel. Their own weight would cause fatal injury if they fell. They seldom do, negotiating steep trails with uncanny care. Going down, as anyone who has climbed a mountain knows, can be harder than going up, especially if you weigh 4 tons. But elephants have a way of overcoming the problem. It's undignified, perhaps, but most effective. Throughout the dry season, the matriarchs have led their family groups far and wide. Now, as though to reaffirm a common bond, they bring the herds together in a congregation of over 400 animals. All the herds are related. Among the matriarchs, there are sisters, daughters, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and cousins. Their knowledge, their decisions determine the survival or extinction of the herds. The calves are very carefully looked after by every animal in the herd. There's no real danger of them being trampled in the crush. Closely watched by its mother and an aunt, the calf is allowed to find out about deep water for itself. Relatives from other herds always note and gently inspect the calves born since the last congregation. With the rains likely to end soon, bullfrogs embark on a frenzy of feeding. This may be the last chance to take on reserves before they must bury themselves for the dry season. Bullfrogs will devour anything that moves. Another movement catches the frog's attention, and the mouse is saved. The bullfrog grips its prey with 2 large and very sharp teeth. Upward pressure of the tongue and downward pressure of the eyeballs then dispatches the meal to the stomach. Scorpions are easy prey, though their sting gives other animals excruciating pain. A giant scorpion, almost 6 inches long. The bullfrog is stung many times, but seems unaffected. The centipede is even more unpleasant than scorpions. In fact, it even eats scorpions. Though it flinches, the bullfrog is undeterred. Burrowing bullfrogs are a sure sign that the good times are coming to an end. Unless they dig in before the soil hardens, they will not survive the dry months ahead. When a female elephant comes into season, the males, who otherwise live apart, are attracted to the herd by her condition. There are several suitors, but the dominant bull is not challenged. The small cow is extremely agitated by the presence of the bull with a broken tusk, but he is not interested in her at all. His attention is directed toward another bull with a floppy ear, and they don't seem to like each other very much. Real fights are rare among elephants, but this is becoming serious. It looks passive, but each bull has grasped the other's tusk and is straining to raise his opponent's head for a lethal stab in the throat. Only the small cow is disturbed by the fight. The bull with a broken tusk withdraws from the contest. Why they were fighting is not clear. Neither has shown any interest in the female. Neither could have challenged the dominant bull. Perhaps a broken tusk and a floppy ear are in themselves reason enough to start a fight. The victor pursues the defeated bull, tracking the trail by scent. Four hours later, the chase was still on. When the grass begins to dry and drop its seeds, the black-faced sand grouse begins its courtship. The female sits motionless on her 3 eggs, concealed from all eyes by her natural camouflage. She sits from dusk until the male comes to take over in the morning. Though they nest in semi-desert at some distance from water, sand grouse drink every day. Once she leaves the nest, the female will soon fly to the nearest water, while the male prepares for the long, hot hours ahead. The pulsating throat motion is called gular flapping. It's cooling behavior, much less exhausting than panting. Soil temperature at the nest often soars to 130 degrees Fahrenheit by early afternoon. The male raises his feathers in another effort to keep cool. It will be 21 days before the eggs hatch. After drinking, the female spends the day feeding. In the late afternoon, when the temperature has fallen sufficiently, the male leaves the eggs, which are then left unattended until the female arrives for the night shift. The newly hatched chicks are perfectly camouflaged. They leave the nest immediately. Like all game birds, sand grouse feed themselves from the moment they leave the egg. Both adults look after the chicks. The chicks must have water every day, but they cannot fly to the water hole. So each morning, a remarkable event takes place. The male flies off to fetch water for his brood. He may be gone for half an hour or more, but the chicks will not move until he returns. The female stays too, but keeps well away from the chicks. The male flies fast to the water hole, which is about 7 miles away. Predators, such as the Lanner falcon, must be avoided on the way. The survival of the chicks depends upon him getting through. Sand grouse have a unique way of carrying drinking water back to the chicks. When wet, the downy parts of their belly feathers expand and absorb water. Weight for weight, the feathers hold twice as much as a sponge. No other bird capable of absorbing water in this way carries it back to its chicks for drinking. In fact, most birds' feathers are designed to repel water, not collect it. The male usually does the water collecting. Perhaps this female has lost her mate. Now she collects water to keep her brood alive. The distance between the nest and water hole is critical. If it's too great, the water will evaporate during the flight. The grasshopper buzzard is one of many predators that would take the chicks if they moved. Though the precious water is evaporating, even a pygmy falcon, smaller than the sand grouse, represents danger. From the first day of their lives, the chicks know precisely where to find the water. They will drink there every day for 3 or 4 weeks until they are fully fledged. Until then, they are totally dependent on their parents for water. The smaller water holes dry up first. Soon only the larger ones remain. Hundreds of elephants each take 40 gallons a day, and much more evaporates in the heat as the dry season sets in. The parade goes on day after day, hastening the end of the water hole and forcing the animals into ever closer contact. The rhino is the only animal that can seriously injure a grown elephant. They are always treated with respect. This is a most critical time for the sand grouse. The chicks are 3 or 4 weeks old, still unable to fly, and still totally dependent upon their parents' hazardous journeys to water. The growing chicks need more and more water. On especially hot days, they're frantic, and a second flight to the water hole often is necessary. action of wetting and chicks drinking would soon reduce normal feathers to a useless tangled mass. However, sand grouse belly feathers spring back to their original shape. Soon, there'll be no more need to collect water for the chicks. A few more days, and they'll be able to fly. They'll survive if the water holds out. It's the elephants that finish off the water holes by churning them into mud wallows. But that's the way it is. After all, the elephants made the first depression that collected the water. Now they carry on the process as they have done for centuries, taking away tons of soil on their huge bodies, each year deepening and enlarging the water holes, making them ready for the rains to come. Without elephants, there would be few water holes in Tsavo. The water holes dry up long before the vegetation around them is finished. Once the water is gone, the animals must return to the river, leaving behind the food reserve they'll use in the next round of seasons. The warthog has a long walk ahead. For the Egyptian goose, it's but a short flight to the river. The lungfish stays, retreating into the hardening mud, blowing bubbles to keep open an air passage to the surface, just as lungfish have done for millions of years. The animals are gone. The lungfish, the snails, and frogs are underground. The water hole is dormant, waiting for a distant roll of thunder to signal that the rains have come again. In 20 years as a wildlife cameraman, Simon Trevor has filmed hundreds of wild elephants. But there's one in particular he will never forget. It was the day he was attacked by a very angry female and literally taken for a ride in his bush wagon. Trevor says her tusks came right through the side of the vehicle just behind me. Then she picked it up with me still inside, hanging on for grim death, looking down onto the hood. When she picked me up a third time, I managed to start the engine, and she suddenly let go, he says. Despite his close encounter, Trevor, who was once a game warden in Kenya, has a special admiration for elephants and has devoted much of his life to protecting those magnificent animals. I'm George Page for Nature.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, supplying natural gas across this land of ours, providing gas energy to fuel industry, warm homes, heat water, and cook meals for over 160 million people from coast to coast.
modern-day explorers risked life and reputation to conquer new frontiers. Stay with 11 now as Smithsonian World follows them where none has gone before.